so just general market sentiment, not specific to Africa. I mean, we got the State of the Union address in the United States, and Barack Obama would have us believe that the economy is recovering and corporate numbers are starting to look up, and 3 million jobs have been created. And in Europe, the leaders want us to believe that they will get this whole debt thing under wraps. So is the tide turning?
The tide, we seem to think it is turning. I mean, I think it's just a question, I guess, of what happens in Europe and perhaps the resolution that will come out of Europe. I mean, from an African market perspective, we rely quite heavily on flows out of Europe, flows out of the United States. I mean, as we know, globally, that's where capital sits. So until the situation in both America and Europe is sort of fixed, we're not going to go too far, I guess, globally, including obviously the East and Asia and what have you.
I mean, a good barometer of foreign investor sentiments and the extent to which we're getting portfolio flows and bond sales is South Africa. And I think since 2012 started, it's fair to say the JSE is firmly on the up.
JSE is firmly on the up. I think the positive sentiment is coming through the market, obviously we're seeing through. I think what's also interesting about global markets is you tend to see the emerging markets such as South Africa and Egypt and Morocco tend to react first when there are global flows, when there are capital flows from the US or from Europe, I guess. I guess it's just a question of, you know, these markets are some of the largest markets in Africa, and they're the most liquid in Africa, so they tend to sort of get lifted first before the other smaller frontier markets tend to get the benefit. So from what we've seen this week as well, I mean, it's exactly, or in the past week, over the last couple of weeks, exactly as we've seen. Egypt has continued to run, South Africa has continued to have a strong, very strong performance, and this also reflected in the rand, as we've seen. The rand has strengthened quite drastically, and obviously that's reflective of sort of positive capital flows coming into the country.
Those investors that have started to come through, those funds, are they directed at local equities, or do we continue to see them flooding the local bond markets? I
think, you know, I mean, we've seen the JSE obviously hitting an all-time high. So, I mean, I guess that's quite reflective of where the cash is also going. You know, I think people are looking for yield, people are looking for opportunities out there in the world, and we've seen obviously, you know, both the equity and the fixed income markets in South Africa benefit quite a bit.
All right, and Namibia also on the up, but that tends to track South Africa because we've got a lot of cross.
There's a very high correlation between sort of Namibia and South Africa, obviously because of the cross-listed shares.
Okay, let's talk about the ones that didn't really perform. Let's start off with Botswana. The turnover, though, is up at 49 million pula. Financial is doing well, and a new listing in the form of Choppies, but that wasn't enough.
I think Choppies wasn't enough. I mean, we saw Choppies on the first day going up, climbing. It listed on Thursday last week. We saw it running about 22% up just on the day. The following day was up another 10%. So just on the 2 days it started trading was up over 34%. So from that perspective, you know, although Choppies was a new listing, came in quite nicely. We saw a reversal in terms of just the performance, especially from the banks, from some of the larger caps. So from a Botswana perspective, unfortunately, you know, the gains from Choppies were sort of wiped out by some of the larger caps pulling back. And obviously, I mean, from a Botswana perspective, I mean, we know what's actually happening now towards the end of January is a lot of portfolio managers are rebalancing their portfolios. Obviously, a lot of people just got back from holiday and from wherever else, and they're looking to position their funds obviously nicely into the 2012, I guess, for the rest of the year.
Staying within the region, we've also got a downward slide in Zimbabwe. Foreigners that have really been sitting on the fence, wanting to see how far the government will go, now they're just pulling out.
They're just pulling out because I think we need a catalyst in Zimbabwe. And I think the politics, we need to get a resolution on the political situation in Zimbabwe. Until we see that happening, we won't really see a lot of confidence from foreigners.
Why do you think the delayed reaction? Because, you know, the mining index, for instance, down 50%, indigenization really sending cold chills down people's spines. But nonetheless, the Zim exchange has been a good performer. So to a large extent, the investors were sitting on the fence, probably a little bit too optimistically. So why react now?
Well, I guess Gaza, you know, the Zimbabwean market for the most part of last year in 2011 was the best performer. It was only sort of towards Q4 of last year where it sort of started turning around. And I think there's also a bit of fatigue from investors. There's a little bit of fatigue from investors where you're seeing, for instance, people have seen good corporate results coming through, but they're waiting for the good catalyst, which is the politics, I guess. And I think a lot of foreigners now, especially looking at domestic markets, perhaps struggling a little bit, are thinking, well, you know, we've made a little bit of money in Zimbabwe over the last year or 2 years. Maybe it's time to take a little bit of the table. But if you look at Zimbabwe from a fundamental perspective, you know, from the companies that are listed, you look at Econet, you look at Insco, companies that were sold down quite heavily last week, like Delta, for instance, are very strong performers fundamentally, and we expect results to come out and they'll be very strong, obviously, going forward.
Zambia was another one of those interesting markets, frontier markets. People were hungry and excited about Zambia. Then they got a new president in the form of the King Cobra, as he's called. And that's really just reversed things for Zambia. Last week was the issue of Zamtel and the board being suspended and the company going under curatorship. What is going on there?
I think that's exactly what's giving investors a jitters. You know, everyone is sitting back thinking, what's going to happen in the economy? I mean, are we going to get a lot of these transactions getting reversed? I mean, where's the economic policy, you know? Is the government friendly towards investment, to investors and what have you? So I think a lot of the concerns are coming through. Of course, we need a bit of, you know, the political situation to settle. We need clearer sort of economic policy as to especially what's happened with all these transactions like Zamtel and Zanaco and what have you. So I think from that perspective, you've seen the weakness reflect, because I think investors are thinking, well, you know, we're not sure where the direction is here. Let's sort of sit back and watch what's happening here.